When you look at the cover of Renature, what do you think? I mean, you got this beautiful looking tree, cute little animals, really nice bright artwork. It might look like a kind of lightweight family game, something really welcoming, inviting, something friendly. And sure, while you can play it as a family game, this is actually a really deceptively brutal game. There's a lot of opportunities to be mean to your opponent, steal each other's points, get in each other's way, and that's really what makes this game so good. Renature is a game for 2 to 4 players that plays in about 45 minutes to an hour. It's co-designed by Wolfgang Kramer and Michael Kiesling, with artwork by Dennis Lohausen, and it's published by Capstone Games. In Renature, each player starts with a certain number of dominoes depending on player count. You have 3 face-up dominoes to choose from on your turn. You place a domino on the board, either in one of the 4 starting spaces or adjacent to a matching animal, and then you can also place a plant piece from your personal board. Placing a plant automatically scores you 1 point, plus 1 additional point for every other piece already there of equal or lesser value, regardless of color. You see, each player has plants of 4 different values ranging from 1 to 4. Turfs, bushes, pines, and oaks. So the bigger pieces have potential to score more points. But when these areas get fully surrounded, points will also be awarded to the player with the highest majority of total plant points. So for example, a bush is a value of 2, and a pine is a value of 3, so that would be a total of 5 if you had them both in the same area. But anyone can be the player to place the domino that fully surrounds the area, whether that player actually had plants in that area or not. And the player that surrounded the area gains this little sunflower token, which contains a hidden point value that they'll add to their score at the end of the game. So a lot of the game ends up being piggybacking off of your other opponent's turns, trying to go where there are a lot of plants where you can place just 1 plant to score off of their plants that are there, or trying to overtake other people to get the majorities in areas. There's a lot of kind of manipulation of these areas that can be done throughout the game to alter the scoring. So it's a game that feels like everything can change in a single turn. You know, there can be these big game-changing moves that happen that, you know, take you from feeling like you're completely behind and almost out of it to suddenly being in the driver's seat. This really does feel like a game of inches and little incremental decisions that can make a big difference and have these sort of long-term ripple effects. And, you know, based on what I've described of the game so far, it might sound a little simple, so you might be a little surprised to hear me say this, but there are 3 key things that set this game apart and make it so good. The first key thing is these neutral pieces. So on your player board, each player has a bunch of pieces, these plants of their own color, but also plants of a neutral color. And the way these work is when you're adding these plants to the board, they still score you the immediate points the same way whether you have your neutral pieces or your colored pieces. But where these neutral pieces come into play is when the areas get surrounded and the majorities are scored. Let's say the neutral color is first or second, those points would then go to that, well, there is no neutral player collecting points, but basically it would go to the neutral color rather than going to one of the players. So the fact that both players or all players involved can be placing these neutral pieces allows opportunities where, you know, you can be first place in an area and your opponent is second place, and by placing a neutral token there that might overtake their strength, that neutral token, that color might now be second in terms of the majority, stealing the points from your opponent. There's all kinds of stuff you can do with these neutral pieces, whether it's denying your opponent or just using them to score points for yourself. And these neutral pieces have other lasting effects that can come into play with the next 2 points that I'm going to get into. So the second one that really sets this game apart is the rules for ties when calculating majorities. So the way it works is when you compare strength to determine the first and second highest majority in the area, any colors that are tied on value are basically, they cancel each other out. So they basically are considered to be not present. So let's say me playing as black, I had a little black plant in there, and then let's say my opponent was playing as orange and they had a giant oak, and there was also a neutral oak. Those 2 oaks would actually cancel each other out, even though they're the higher strength, and the other player, playing black in this case, would be the only one considered in that area. And the other thing is, if an area gets surrounded and only 1 color is present, that player scores both the first and second majority points on the sunflower token. So they basically get the value of the entire area. So there's a lot of kind of stuff that you can do with these neutral pieces and offsetting colors for ties where basically they cancel each other out. It's brilliant. It makes for all kinds of opportunities on your turn to, you know, manipulate where an area is going and kind of who's in control of it. And the third and final thing that sets this game apart, and this is probably the best aspect of it, it's such a simple rule. They're very simple components, but each player has 6 of these little cloud tokens. And these basically allow you to break the rules of the game, and this just blows everything wide open in Renature. Basically, on your turn, at any point, at the start, middle, end of your turn, or whatnot, you can use any number of clouds for these cloud actions, and you can do this any number of times on your turn. So one of the things you can do with your clouds is you can cash in either 1, 2, 3, or 4 clouds to take back a plant, either of your own color or the neutral color, from anywhere on the board, whether it's an area that was surrounded or not, and take it back onto your personal board. So that's one thing you can spend your clouds on. You can also spend 2 clouds on your turn to change the wild suit. I haven't mentioned yet, but there are 10 different animals on this game that are going to be appearing on the dominoes. At the start of the game, the butterfly is always wild, which allows you to place butterflies next to anything else or anything else next to a butterfly. By spending 2 cloud tokens, you can change the wild suit either before you take your turn or after your turn, so it opens up possibilities for yourself and also for potentially blocking your opponents. The other thing you can do with the clouds, which is probably the biggest deal here, is you can spend 3 cloud tokens to take another turn immediately. This is where things just get absolutely crazy, and this opens up even more possibilities in Renature, because you might need to get, further away down the map, and the only way to get there, one domino might not get you there. So you can maybe take a turn, place a domino, do something, cash in 3 clouds, then place another domino. Now you took 2 turns to get a little further away. So you have these clouds that kind of, it's almost like this magic power that you have that's going to break the rules of the game and let you do something crazy whenever you want. You can use them all in one go, you can save them and use them throughout smaller little bits, but I found that most of the time the player who wins the game in Renature is almost always the player who did the best job and was the most creative with their cloud tokens and making them count. And what ties these all together, what I mentioned, is these clouds are allowing you to take back neutral pieces, which you maybe already used for something somewhere else, but you can take it back and use it again to keep denying your opponents or swaying the scoring conditions in certain areas. It's absolutely brilliant. You only get 6 of them, and at the end of the game, any of the ones you don't use are worth a point on your board. The other thing that I want to mention when I talk about clouds and bringing these pieces back is at the end of the game, for all your plants that you have on your board, you're going to lose points equal to their value. So sure, you can place an oak on the board and then keep taking it back and using it and taking it back, but if you have a bunch of pieces of plants left on your board at the end, you're going to lose points for them. So the rules of the game end up being very, very simple, where you're just using these dominoes as a kind of vehicle to get where you want to place those plants, but the neutral pieces and the rules with ties and the clouds kind of create a number of possibilities for you to experiment with as you play. As you can see, this is a game with a pretty high level of player interaction. I mean, it's really up to the players how much they want to get in each other's faces and do this kind of stuff, but again, because you have these neutral pieces on your board and they're gonna, lose you points at the end of the game if you don't place them, you really need to make the best use of them. So going into this game, there's almost a bit of a social contract that you have to be playing with the idea to deny your opponent and get in their way. If you think you want to play a low interaction game where everyone just does their own thing, you probably won't have any chance of winning this game. It's basically forcing you to use these neutral pieces in a way that's going to help you, and that's usually by actually, getting in your opponent's way more than anything. Now, how does this apply to player count? Well, the game is very different based on player count because, as I said, as a 2-player game, you're each getting 26 dominoes, so you're going to get 26 turns. Whereas on the flip side, on a 4-player game, you're only getting 13 dominoes, so you don't get as many turns. The board state's going to change a lot more before it comes around to you. So in a 4-player game, it becomes a lot more tactical. Every turn, you sort of have to reanalyze the game state and decide what's the best move for me right now, because I don't know if I'm going to be able to win that area if I put a plant there and commit to it, or, everything is a little more obscured, everything's a little more hidden. You can't really bank on things in the same way with a 4-player game. But at the same time, it is pretty exciting because you can have 3, 4 different colors, or with the neutral player, you can even have 5 different colors in the same area fighting over majorities. So everyone gets fewer turns. The game can slow down a little bit more as everyone's kind of trying to crunch the area numbers in the areas, figuring out, well, there's already 4 different colors and they have these plants in there. So I think it's excellent with 4 players still. It wouldn't be my favorite player count to play it I think it shines best at 3. Because in a 2-player game, sure, there are, again, when you surround an area, usually there's going to be 2 colors that score for the first and second majority. And in a 2-player game, usually there's just either, the 2 players, potentially the neutral color, adding that third player in really adds another dimension. You have the fewer tiles or fewer dominoes, but 18 is still quite a bit. You still have a lot of turns, but I find 3 players is that sweet spot. 2 players is still really, really great, but it ends up being, of course, more of that head-to-head tactical thing, similar as if you were to playing like a game like Carcassonne at 2 players, where every single turn you're trying to figure out, is this going to help me better or hurt my opponent? Whereas in the 4-player game, you might have to just focus a little more on what you can get done for yourself. So I think it works extremely well at all player counts, but I would say 3-player is definitely the best player count for this game. So I imagine it's already pretty obvious that I really like this game, and honestly, I struggle to find much to criticize about it. I did mention that with 4 players, there can be a little more downtime. You know, maybe there's some luck of the draw in terms of which dominoes you do and don't get, but I don't know if those are really even fair criticisms because everyone's playing under those same restrictions. And again, with the cloud actions and, you know, all these things with the neutral pieces, it always feels like there's a way out of it. It always feels like there's a way to mitigate that luck a bit. And, you know, whether it's changing the wild suit because you think, oh, I didn't have any turtles, so I couldn't get in there. Well, maybe you make, you know, maybe you have a lot of salamanders or owls, so you change the wild suit to that. There's this kind of, you know, growing feeling throughout the game too. As you see the board develop, you can see which animals have or have not been out there a lot, and because they're all in equal numbers, you can even try and suss out what's going on. I mean, the setup is maybe a bit long for what the game is, for how long the game takes. You know, you also might run into an issue where you accidentally knock your tiles over from your face down stack and you see which ones you have, and then once you do, you can't really unsee them. Even if you're putting them in, you know at some point you're going to have that tile later on. But these are almost issues that just could happen in any game if a player bumps pieces off or whatnot. Really, I'm just kind of looking for anything to criticize here because I want to be fair to the game, but it's such a good game, and even those little things that might detract or might, you know, again, the little downtime for higher player counts, it's offset because, or the setup I mentioned, because the components are so beautiful. The game has such an awesome table presence once it's out there, and every single time I play it, after I'm done playing it, the game is on my mind. I'm thinking about that awesome move that someone had halfway through the game where we all thought they were out of it and they just got themselves back into the game with this one brilliant move. And a quick note on replay value. Because every player gets a random set of dominoes and you have a random set of 3 starting dominoes and whatnot, you're gonna have a different set of tiles every game, and the game's gonna play out differently because as players, you're starting near the top of the board on these starting spaces, and you're kind of placing them trickling down through these water spaces, trying to develop these areas. And at the bottom of the board, there's the biggest, most valuable area. They get more valuable the lower you go, aside from those bottom 2 corner ones. So the idea that, you know, I've had games where we're all completely surrounded fighting over this bottom area. I've had other games where we barely even reach the bottom area because no one wants to be the one extending, adding dominoes, making, you know, creating an opportunity for their opponent to then extend from there to get into the area. So sometimes you trickle down to about here, and then players are stubbornly building off to the sides and trying to cram more stuff in rather than going down. So again, I've played this almost 10 times now, and every game seems to have a different arc from start to finish. Sometimes that game-breaking move I was talking about happens on, you know, the second last turn of the game. Sometimes it happens turn 7 or turn 8 early on, and you think, oh, if I lose, that's probably going to be the move that did it to me. So I think there's tons of replay value here as well because of the variable kind of setup, as well as the values on these point tokens that you don't know till the end. So there's really a lot to like here, and it's really tough to criticize such a great game. More and more these days, I'm looking for games that squeeze a lot of complexity out of simple rules, and Renature basically epitomizes that better than most games can do, because you still have such a high level of player interaction and so many options on every turn. You know, you might think that certain dominoes don't match up, but you can change the wild suit, you can use these cloud tokens, there's always something you can do, there's always a bunch of possibilities out there. But because there's always room for your opponents to undo your plans, you can't just calculate everything on your turn. Things are hidden, so it stops you from getting too into that analysis paralysis, because as soon as you start going down the rabbit hole of, well, if I place this, then my opponent places, you realize, well, anyone can just take those pieces back or do something or take 2 turns with clouds later, so it kind of forces you to just hedge your bets and kind of go on your gut feeling a little bit rather than just calculate every move, which I really like. So if you're looking to play a game with someone or with a few people and you guys are all open to being sort of that mean player interaction, getting in each other's way, this is an amazing option for you. If you're looking for a more friendly family weight game where you kind of stay out of each other's way and do your own thing, then Renature probably won't do it for you. But like I said, this is absolutely one of my top games of the year. Fantastic game from Kramer and Kiesling and Capstone Games. I highly recommend you check out Renature if you haven't yet. Otherwise, that's it for this review. If you enjoyed this review, please consider subscribing to our channel if you haven't yet. Otherwise, that's it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.